The relentless pace of the fashion industry had long since drained the joy from Stella Alonso's life. As a magazine assistant at Washington, D.C. Style, she was little more than a ghost in the office, enduring the constant, sharp-tongued demands of her boss, Meredith. After a grueling photo shoot, Stella found herself abandoned in the middle of a brewing Washington, D.C. blizzard, tasked with hauling heavy equipment back alone while her boss headed to a dinner reservation. The physical exhaustion was manageable, but the weight of a recent email was not. Her grandmother Maura's assisted living facility, Greenfield, was raising its monthly fees by 20%, bringing the total to $600 to $500. Stella had kept her financial support of Maura a secret from her high-achieving family for years, and now, the mounting debt felt like a tightening noose. Through the swirling snow, a sleek black McLaren pulled to the curb. The driver was Christian Harper, the lethal and enigmatic CEO of a global security firm and the owner of the Mirage, the luxury building where Stella lived. Their connection was thin but significant. After Stella's roommate moved out, Christian had offered her a massive rent reduction in exchange for watering the plants in his penthouse. It was a logical arrangement on the surface, but Christian was a man who operated entirely on cold pragmatism and hidden agendas. Despite her initial polite refusal to accept a ride, his quiet authority compelled her into the car. The short drive was thick with a magnetic, unsettling tension. Stella tried to maintain her composed, perfect Alonso persona, but Christian's presence always seemed to peel back her layers. In the shadows of his private library, Christian's life was a series of calculated moves. He viewed the world as a collection of puzzles and ciphers, and Stella was the only one he couldn't quite solve. He resented his own fascination with her, acknowledging that the plant-watering deal was merely a ruse to keep her within his sphere of influence. When he wasn't observing her, he spent his nights engaged in digital vigilantism, hacking into the devices of corrupt tycoons to drain their wealth and expose their crimes. It was a cold, efficient existence, yet his thoughts drifted back to the tenant who lived several floors below him. The pressure on Stella reached a breaking point during a high-stakes industry dinner in New York. She was there to audition for a brand ambassador role with Delamonte, a contract that would solve all her financial problems at Greenfield. Instead, she found herself sidelined and mocked by a viral influencer couple who had once been her friends. Christian appeared unexpectedly at the event, moving through the room like a silent predator. He didn't just attend, he intervened. With a few sharp words and a strategic seat swap, he placed Stella next to the Delamonte CEO and gave her the opening she needed to make a professional impression. For a moment, it felt like a victory, but the high was short-lived. The next Monday, Meredith fired her, labeling her fashion blog a conflict of interest and her performance inadequate. Unemployed and desperate, Stella faced a stagnant social media following of 899,000. Her manager suggested a calculated move. The public was obsessed with romance, and a fake boyfriend would be the only way to break the million-follower mark and secure the Delamonte deal. After a string of disastrous dates with misogynistic bloggers and crypto-obsessed strangers, Stella hit a wall of defeat. She ran into Christian at a bar, and in a rare moment of alcohol-induced vulnerability, she confessed the truth about her job, her grandmother's care, and her failing plan. Christian saw an opportunity. He proposed a mutually beneficial contract. He needed a sophisticated, no-strings-attached companion for high-level business functions to humanize his cold public image. In exchange, he would provide the status and financial security she needed. Stella refused a direct payout for Maura's care, but she agreed to the fake relationship. The rules were strict: no sex, no falling in love, and most importantly, his face was never to appear on her social media. He was a ghost in the digital world and intended to stay that way. The emotional stakes of the deal became clear during a visit to Greenfield. Stella brought her grandmother temblek, a traditional coconut pudding, hoping to spark a memory. Maura, lost in the middle stages of Alzheimer's, didn't recognize her, eventually calling her by the name of her late daughter. The pain of being forgotten by the woman who raised her only hardened Stella's resolve. She would do whatever it took to keep Maura safe and comfortable, even if it meant entering a fraudulent relationship with a dangerous man. The public launch of their arrangement took place at a lavish Smithsonian gala. Christian arrived at Stella's apartment early, presenting her with a custom-tailored emerald silk gown that left him visibly stunned. The car ride to the museum was charged with a new, physical intensity. Seizing the moment, Stella snapped a photo of Christian's tanned hand resting against her silk-clad thigh, posting it to her followers with a caption about date night. Inside the museum, the perfect couple went to work. Stella used her social intuition to charm a major private equity giant, inventing stories about Christian's supposed volunteer work to soften his reputation. The gamble worked, and Christian secured a massive new client. However, the professional mask slipped when Stella disappeared for a brief moment to tend to a stain on her dress. Christian's reaction was not that of a business partner, but of a possessive guardian. He found her in a quiet hallway and pinned her against the wall, his voice dark and commanding as he demanded she never leave his sight again. He called her Butterfly, a nickname that felt far too intimate for a contract. As they returned to the gala, the logic of their agreement began to fray. Christian realized he was no longer just acting the part, and Stella began to fear that the man she had made a deal with was far more dangerous to her heart than she had ever imagined. The contract was signed, but the boundaries were already dissolving. The morning after the Smithsonian Gala, the digital world exploded. Stella's soft launch of her mystery man, a single, intimate photo of a tanned hand resting on her emerald silk-clad thigh, had become a viral sensation. While Stella was still processing the night's events, her best friends Jules, Ava, and Bridget staged a playful but pointed interrogation. Stella found herself trapped in a web of necessary lies. She confessed the relationship was a fake arrangement for her career, hiding the deeper desperation of Maura's medical bills. The strategy, however, was undeniably effective. Overnight, her following jumped by 10,000, and the dream of the Delamonte contract finally felt like a tangible reality rather than a desperate hope. Yet, as the public fascination grew, the private walls between Stella and Christian began to crumble in violent and unexpected ways. A few nights later, Stella entered Christian's penthouse to water the plants one last time, only to be met by his lethal, hair-trigger instincts. Operating in the dark on pure muscle memory, Christian pinned her against the wall with his hand at her throat before realizing who she was. The accidental confrontation shattered the fragile peace between them. Shaken and furious at his cold dismissal of the scare, Stella did something no one did to Christian Harper. She fought back. She returned his office key and quit their plant care arrangement on the spot, determined to reclaim some semblance of independence from her icy landlord. That independence was short-lived. Later that same day, Stella discovered a typed note tucked deep inside her purse. "You were supposed to wait for me, Stella. You didn't." The words acted like a physical blow, dragging her back to the paralyzing trauma of the stalker who had vanished 2 years prior. The realization that someone had been close enough to touch her bag sent Stella into a spiraling panic attack. When Christian arrived at her door shortly after, he found her hyperventilating under a table. In an instant, the jerk who had dismissed her hours earlier vanished, replaced by a titanium wall of absolute protection. He didn't just offer comfort, he took command, ordering 24-hour covert security and insisting on a total forensic sweep of her life. Amidst this rising terror, the external world continued to demand the perfect Alonso persona. Stella was summoned to a high-pressure family dinner where her father's political prestige and her mother's legal success made her blogging career feel like a disappointment. To satisfy her family's cold curiosity about her new boyfriend, Stella spun a lie, claiming she and Christian had been dating for 3 months. Her mother immediately ordered that Christian attend the next family gathering, adding another layer of complexity to their fraudulent deal. Despite the stress, a small warmth flickered when Christian texted to check on her, proving that his protectiveness wasn't just a professional obligation. To keep the bait set for the stalker and maintain her social media momentum, Christian forced Stella out of her self-imposed hibernation for an art gallery opening. Surrounded by abstract realism, the physical boundaries of their deal blurred into dangerous territory. For the benefit of a nearby photographer, Christian leaned in, burying his face in the crook of Stella's neck in a display of possessive intimacy. To the camera, it was the perfect mystery man shot. To Stella, the touch felt electric and terrifyingly real. She was crushed when Christian later retreated into his colder-than-a-volcano persona, insisting he had no interest in art or love. He claimed it was all business, even as his internal thoughts revealed a man struggling to maintain his legendary composure against the scent of her skin. Late March brought a moment of profound professional triumph that briefly eclipsed the fear. Encouraged by a designer friend to embrace the risk of failure, Stella finally returned to her long-abandoned fashion sketches. As she filled pages with intricate lace and elegant silhouettes, the dream deal finally arrived, a 6-figure ambassador offer from Delamonte. It was the financial salvation she needed for her grandmother and the capital required to launch her own line. But the euphoria died the moment she stepped back into her apartment. Despite the elite security and locked doors, she found a second note resting mockingly on her nightstand. "I warned you." The sanctuary of her home had been violated, and the stalker had bypassed every defense Christian had built. The scream that tore from Stella's throat brought Christian to her side within minutes. His fury was lethal and systematic. He fired the entire security shift and dictated that she move into his penthouse immediately. Inside the luxury of his private quarters, Christian observed that Stella was in a state of catatonic shock. In a move that was uncharacteristically tender, he guided her into his master suite. Because the guest bath was out of commission, he prepared a bath for her in his own deep tub, infusing the water with eucalyptus and bubbles to soothe her frayed nerves. When a traumatized Stella asked him to stay with her, Christian faced an internal war between his carnal desires and his protective instincts. He chose the latter, sitting at the edge of the tub to wash her hair and scrub her back with a clinical yet deeply intimate focus. He realized in that moment that touching her in such a vulnerable state was both a salvation and a curse. It was a disturbing obsession he could no longer categorize as a mere project. That night, for the first time in his life, Christian shared his private sleeping quarters. As he watched Stella fall into an exhausted sleep in his bed, he stood guard in the shadows. He was no longer just a landlord or a fake boyfriend. He was a man willing to become a sinner to protect his butterfly, acknowledging that she was now the most dangerous thing in his world because of how much he stood to lose. Stella awoke in the unfamiliar luxury of Christian's master suite. The scent of leather and expensive silk a sharp reminder of the night the world shifted. The transition from her violated apartment to the safety of the penthouse was immediate, but the emotional boundaries remained jagged. By 8 in the morning, Christian had already reverted to his cold, professional armor. He laid out a new reality. The night in his bed was a singular exception, and she was to move into the guest room immediately. He established a set of house rules designed for her survival: bodyguards, shifting schedules, and total transparency with her friends. When Stella demanded a guarantee that he wouldn't bring other women into their shared space, his response was a chillingly brief declaration that he didn't cheat. It was a statement that left the true nature of their arrangement hanging in the air, neither fully a business deal nor a romance. The domesticity of the penthouse soon gave way to a surprising professional synergy. Christian, usually a man of secrets and shadows, opened his library to Stella, offering to mentor her on the business mechanics of her nascent fashion brand. During a late-night session, as she showed him her intricate sketches, the air between them became heavy with a different kind of tension. In a moment where logic finally failed him, Christian leaned in for a brief, electric kiss, a one-syllable contact that scorched them both. As the papers of her dreams fluttered unheeded to the floor, the kiss served as a transformative spark. Christian pulled back abruptly, retreating into the safety of a business meeting reminder, but the perfect Alonso facade Stella had spent years building was beginning to crack under the heat of his touch. The stakes of their fake life reached a peak during a high-pressure trip to New York for the Delamonte photo shoot. Aboard his private jet, the silence was thick with unresolved desire, punctuated only by glimpses of Christian's quiet power. At the studio, however, Stella hit a wall of paralyzing imposter syndrome. Under the scrutinizing gaze of the CEO and the harsh lights of the camera, she froze, her movements stiff and artificial. Christian intervened with the force of a titanium wall. He didn't just offer platitudes. He stepped into her space and grounded her, reminding her that she was the only choice for the brand because of her unique value. His support culminated in a soft, grounding kiss that broke her internal storm. Fortified, Stella delivered a triumphant performance that left the crew in awe, ending the session by tossing Christian a playful, confident wink, a sign that her long hibernation was finally over. While Stella's career soared, Christian's investigation into her stalker revealed a terrifying level of sophistication. He discovered a ghost in the machine, a 30-minute window where his elite security footage had been hacked and looped to cover the intruder's entry. The realization that the stalker possessed elite-level technical skills shifted the threat from a standard obsession to a high-stakes hunt. This dark reality shadowed even their performative moments, such as a dinner at the home of Christian's friend, Dante Russo. Throughout the evening, Christian maintained a display of high-key possessiveness, his hand a constant, burning presence on Stella's thigh. Yet, the warmth vanished when Stella questioned him about his past and a mysterious painting known as Magda. He shut her down with icy finality, proving that while he might protect her body, the secrets of his soul remained strictly off-limits. A week of mutual avoidance followed, eventually broken by a milestone that should have been a celebration. Stella hit 1 million followers on Instagram. The victory felt hollow, a numerical count that couldn't soothe the growing turbulence in her heart. When Christian tried to mark the occasion with a $90,000 diamond watch, the transactional nature of the gift pushed Stella to a breaking point. She confronted him, demanding to know why he was treating her like a mistress rather than a business partner. The argument stripped away the last of Christian's restraint. He caged her against the couch, his calm mask shattering as he admitted the raw, haunting truth. He couldn't stop thinking about her, and he would raise the city to the ground to keep her safe. He confessed that he had never wanted anyone more, and he hated himself for the depth of that hunger. This internal war between the protector and the predator defined Christian's nights. While Stella tried to humanize him, catching him in a rare moment of levity dancing to Spice World or offering him a tension-melting massage, Christian continued to struggle with his own monster. At the exclusive Valhalla Club, he found himself unable to look at another woman, his jealousy so potent he resorted to blowing up a rival's car just to vent his lethal frustration. Upon returning home to find Stella sketching, he taunted her with his own maddening attraction, tracing a path along her skin before commanding her to go to her room and lock the door. It was his ultimate act of self-restraint, a warning that he was becoming a danger to the very woman he was sworn to protect. The reality of their situation finally crystallized at a housewarming party for their friends. Surrounded by the laughter and light-hearted bickering of the other couples, Stella and Christian remained trapped in their own private storm. The primal singe of their eye contact across the room was so palpable that it triggered an immediate interrogation from her friends. In the privacy of a bathroom huddle, Stella finally admitted the truth she had been running from. The fake boundaries had officially dissolved into a dark, irresistible alchemy. She was no longer just playing a part in a curated lie. She was falling for a man who claimed to have no heart, and the safety of the penthouse had become a beautiful, dangerous cage. The housewarming party at Josh and Jules's place served as a stark reminder that Christian Harper's carefully constructed walls were crumbling in front of his peers. While the women were away, the men engaged in a sharp, defensive interrogation. Reese Larson, protective of Stella's friendship with his wife, wasted no time mocking Christian's special treatment of his tenant. He accurately deduced that the stoic CEO was catching feelings, a notion Christian attempted to deflect with cold logic. The tension took a humorous turn when it was revealed that Christian and the antisocial Alex Volkov shared a secret monthly chess date, a betrayal that left Josh Chen hilariously wounded. Despite the bickering, the underlying truth was undeniable. The men in the room saw a reflection of their own transformations in Christian. He internally rejected the term love, viewing his obsession with Stella as something far more primal and permanent. He had no intention of ever letting her go. 4 days later, Stella reached a personal milestone that outweighed any digital metric. She finished the first physical piece of her collection, a gold silk dress. The pride she felt was a testament to a dream she was finally chasing for herself. However, the high was punctured by the looming monthly Alonso dinner. To spare herself the interrogation, Stella lied to her sister, claiming Christian was too ill to attend. The lie backfired when Christian, having overheard the conversation, insisted on accompanying her to the family home. The evening was a psychological firing squad. The breaking point arrived when her sister revealed that Stella had been fired months ago, triggering a brutal interrogation from her parents. They dismissed her fashion dreams as a frivolous hobby and, most cuttingly, referred to Maura, the woman who had actually raised Stella, as a mere former employee. Pushed to her limit, Stella finally snapped, declaring that Maura was more of a mother to her than her own biological parents ever were. As the conflict escalated and her father demanded an apology with leashed fury, Christian intervened like a dark, silent tsunami. He didn't just defend Stella, he dismantled her parents' rigid pride, accusing them of prioritizing their status over their daughter's happiness. He threatened the high-ranking government official in his own home, essentially promising to ruin Jarvis Alonso if he continued to belittle Stella. The confrontation ended with Stella being kicked out of the house, but for the first time, she felt liberated. As they drove away, Christian tried to maintain his villain persona, but Stella countered that he was the only person who had ever truly seen her. In the quiet of the car, a sense of genuine partnership formed, marking a definitive break from her past toward the sanctuary Christian provided. The transition to the isolated paradise of Cowie provided a temporary reprieve from the family drama, but it introduced a new, technical terror. Christian discovered that his elite security system at the Mirage had been breached using Scylla, a high-tech hacking tool he had personally developed. This confirmed that a traitor existed within his own company who was collaborating with Stella's stalker. To vent his lethal frustration, Christian launched a cyber rampage from the villa, systematically destroying the digital life of a corrupt bank president. While Christian hunted the mole, Stella found her own professional breakthrough. On the sun-drenched beaches of Hawaii, she realized she didn't need Christian as a crutch for her confidence. She handled the high-pressure Delamonte shoot with a newfound self-assurance, proving to herself that her talent was independent of his protection. On the final day of the campaign, Christian could no longer stay away. He chartered a boat to the Pali coast, arriving to find Stella posing in the shallows. In a display of raw, possessive authority, he ordered the entire crew to vacate the beach in 5 minutes. Alone against the prehistoric ridges of the cliffs, the playful banter between them dissolved into a hypercharged encounter. Christian admitted he hadn't come for the shoot, he had come for her. He made a vow that would define their future. He might not be her first, but he would damn well be her last. He wasn't looking for a girlfriend, he was looking for a permanent claim. Under the open sky and the roar of the Pacific, the fake labels of their relationship were permanently destroyed as they succumbed to a primal, unscripted desire. The intensity followed them back to their private villa for a final night in paradise. Christian presented Stella with a raw ultimatum, asking if she wanted the ordinary or the oblivion of being completely claimed by him. Tired of being the porcelain doll her family expected, Stella chose the latter. The encounter was a masterclass in dominant intensity, where Christian's physical force was coupled with an absolute sense of safety that Stella had never experienced before. He pushed her beyond her limits, demanding she use her voice to beg for what she wanted, shattering the last of her carefully maintained walls. It was a visceral, transformative experience that silenced the anxious voices of doubt in Stella's head. As they drifted into a post-orgasmic sleep, the reality of their shift settled in. Stella realized that she had crossed into a territory where her self-preservation instincts were no longer in control. She was no longer a project or a fake companion. She was extraordinary in the eyes of a man who claimed to have no heart. The trip to Kauai had fundamentally changed the trajectory of her life. She was returning to Washington, D.C. not as the obedient daughter or the struggling influencer, but as a woman who had embraced the darkness of her protector. The butterfly had been caught, and for the first time, the cage didn't feel like a prison, it felt like home. The voices of her past were finally quiet, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic heartbeat of the man who promised to be her final chapter. The morning after their first night in Kauai, the atmosphere between Stella and Christian shifted from a structured contract to a possessive, high-stakes reality. Christian watched her sleep with a newfound intensity, realizing that she had embedded herself into the very parts of his soul he usually kept under lock and key. To him, she was a fascinating puzzle of strength and vulnerability, and he had no intention of ever solving or releasing her. Driven by a rare impulse to prioritize her happiness over his urgent security work in Washington, D.C., he extended their trip. They spent days exploring the island, but the true journey was the emotional ground they covered. On their final evening, during a sunset picnic following a breathless Harley ride, the fantasy met its breaking point. Stella tried to label their time as a beautiful dream, fearing the inevitable crash of reality, but Christian wouldn't let her retreat. He rejected the mundane concept of love in favor of a fierce, exclusive necessity, asking her to date him for real. Choosing the risk of the unknown over the safety of her past, Stella said yes, unaware that the truth Christian was hiding was a bomb waiting to detonate. The transition back to Washington, D.C. brought a deceptive domestic peace. Christian integrated Stella into his life with surprising tenderness, sharing his private sanctuary and even charming her grandmother, Maura. During a visit to Greenfield, Stella watched as the man who usually operated with the precision of an assassin's blade gently de-escalated one of Maura's agitated episodes. Seeing him patiently work on a puzzle with the woman who raised her solidified Stella's feelings. However, this softness was a thin veil over a lethal core. During a high-profile tech event, a man named Frank Rivers forcibly groped Stella. Christian's reaction was terrifyingly quiet at the party, but the aftermath was a masterclass in vigilante brutality. In a soundproofed satellite office, Christian played a lethal game of psychological warfare. He pinned Rivers's hand to a mahogany desk with a blade, ignoring his pleas for mercy, before executing him with a single, silenced shot. Within the hour, the man who had just committed a cold-blooded murder was at a grocery store, meticulously selecting the specific salsa Stella liked for their scheduled taco night. While Stella found a unique sense of safety in their nights together, Christian was submerged in a growing storm. A new stalker note arrived at the penthouse, accompanied by candid surveillance photos that proved the intruder was bypassing professional security to document Stella's daily life. Realizing his internal security was compromised by a traitor, Christian made an irrational, protective decision. He hid the latest threat from Stella, instead surprising her with a month-long dream vacation to Italy. He chose to lead her into a sun-drenched escape rather than let her see the shadows closing in. In Rome, the emotional walls between them finally shattered. Amidst the ancient history of the city, Christian revealed the dark origin of his cynicism. He confessed that his father was the ghost, a notorious art thief who stole out of an obsessive devotion to his mother, a disease of love that eventually led to his father's death and his mother's suicide. This revelation provided the context for Christian's fear of the very word Stella was beginning to feel in her heart. The trip reached its emotional peak on a private boat anchored off the coast of Capri. In a scene of sensory intensity, Christian used his dominance to help Stella quiet her overthinking mind, leading to a moment of profound vulnerability where she finally whispered, "I love you." Christian's response was a study in raw conflict. He admitted he didn't deserve her love, yet he confessed she was the brightest part of his world. He couldn't bring himself to say the word, but his devotion was unmistakable. Stella felt a sense of belonging so deep she believed it could withstand anything. But the return to Washington, D.C. brought the jarring weight of reality back to the surface. While Christian was consumed by professional fires and the hunt for the Harper security traitor, Stella attempted to find order in their home. The deep cleaning of the penthouse led Stella into Christian's private office, a place she usually respected as his fortress. While tidying his desk, she accidentally triggered a hidden spring, revealing a secret compartment. Inside, she found 3 black binders that turned her world to ash. They weren't just business files. They were a comprehensive, invasive dossier on her entire life. Christian had documented everything: her favorite foods, her past boyfriends, her college professors, and her family's deepest secrets. The realization hit her with the force of a physical illness. The perceptiveness she had loved about him wasn't intuition. It was the result of a calculated, cold-blooded data mining project. He had treated her life like a puzzle to be solved and her agency like a secondary concern. Heartbroken and feeling a visceral sense of violation, Stella realized she had fallen for a man who viewed her as an asset to be managed rather than a partner to be loved. With tears in her eyes and her childhood stuffed animal, Mr. Unicorn, tucked under her arm, she packed a small bag and fled into the night. She left a single note on the desk of the man who had turned her existence into a curated lie, seeking refuge with her friends and leaving the sanctuary of the penthouse forever. The silence that greeted Christian when he returned to the penthouse was the heavy, sterile quiet of a tomb. Finding the secret compartment open and Stella's note resting on his desk, he felt the foundation of his carefully constructed world collapse. He tracked her to Alex Volkov's apartment, where the ensuing confrontation was a jagged exploration of betrayal. Stella's horror was visceral. She didn't just see the binders as an invasion of privacy, but as a predatory manipulation of her very soul. Christian confessed the truth he had carried for 5 years, that he had been fascinated by her goodness since witnessing a small act of charity in the street, even retrieving a turquoise ring she had dropped. He admitted he had investigated her long before their official meeting because he was obsessed with the light she cast. To Stella, this made him worse than her stalker. He had made her fall in love with a curated lie. In a final, desperate act of vulnerability, Christian spoke the words he had once viewed as a disease. "I love you. So fucking much." But the confession brought no healing, only a broken sob. Honoring her demand for space, he left the apartment, experiencing a cold emptiness that no amount of power or logic could fill. The 2 weeks that followed were a descent into a hollow existence. Christian abandoned his legendary discipline, drowning his self-loathing in scotch at dive bars where no one knew his name. The penthouse became a museum of Stella's absence, every room a reminder of the domestic peace he had squandered. To cope with the silence, he began writing daily letters to her, unmailed confessions stored in the very drawer that had once held her dossier. He poured his history and his quirks into the pages, detailing the dream dates he had envisioned, including a visit to a tiny Italian restaurant that served gnocchi like his grandmother used to make. He realized that he would rather be miserable having known her than happy in his former ignorance. He was a man fundamentally changed, acknowledging that Stella would always be his first and last love, even if she never spoke to him again. While Christian mourned, he remained a predator in the professional world. He hosted the Harper Security annual poker tournament, using the event as a tactical cover for a canary trap to flush out the company traitor. He fed 4 different versions of a lie regarding a new security device to 4 high-level suspects, knowing the rat would eventually leak the information to his rival, Sentinel. It was a brilliant, cold-blooded maneuver that highlighted his mastery of human nature and cybersecurity. Yet, despite the intellectual victory, he ended the night alone in his kitchen, acknowledging that his life had truly gone to shit without the woman who had become his only source of optimism. For Stella, the separation brought a surprising period of growth and reconciliation. She met her parents for brunch, finally finding the courage to voice years of resentment. For the first time, the accomplishments game was paused. Her mother offered a tentative apology, admitting her own jealousy of Stella's bond with Maura, and her sister, Natalia, expressed genuine regret for her past malice. Stella realized that Christian's greatest gift to her hadn't been protection or money, but the courage to be bolder. She was finally standing on her own feet, repairing her family's fractured dynamics and seeing her fashion line gain real-world traction. However, this newfound peace was shattered in an instant. While at a cafe in Virginia, her bodyguard, Brock, suddenly collapsed in a state of violent sickness. Left alone and feeling a strange, drug-induced lethargy, Stella tried to flee, only to be met by a cold gun pressed against her back. A familiar voice commanded her into the darkness, and before she could scream, she was struck down and plunged into a terrifying void. The professional and personal crises of Christian's life collided at a rusted junkyard on the outskirts of the city. Using his canary trap, he had identified Koge, his right-hand man and the person who had once saved his life, as the traitor. The confrontation was a visceral exploration of Koge's petty envy. He was tired of living in Christian's shadow. The two men engaged in a lethal shootout among the skeletons of old cars, but the fight was interrupted by a high-priority distress signal from Brock, code 23. The message meant Brock was incapacitated and Stella was in immediate danger. In that moment, Christian abandoned his professional goals and his desire for slow revenge. He stepped into the open and executed Koge with the clinical precision of a professional's insurance policy, 4 shots to ensure the traitor would never rise again. Without a second glance, he gunned his car toward the cafe, his mind consumed by a singular, terrifying focus. Arriving at the scene, Christian found a drugged Brock and a missing Stella. He forced the cafe manager to yield the security footage, his internal alarms shifting to a lethal, hyper-focused state. As he watched the grainy playback, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. The man who had drugged them, moving with a casual, practiced ease, was Julian, the journalist from Washington Weekly who had interviewed Stella. He was more than a reporter. He was a resident of the Mirage who had inherited his grandmother's apartment, allowing him to bypass security and hide in plain sight for months. He was the ghost who had haunted their sanctuary. The realization ignited a code-black urgency within Harper Security. Christian recalled every available agent, launching a citywide hunt for the man who had dared to touch his butterfly. He realized that Julian had been methodical, calculating, and patient, making time their greatest enemy. The transition into total emergency mode was absolute. Christian was no longer the mourning lover or the calculated CEO. He was a hunter who had identified his prey. As the search began, he acknowledged that Julian had been the ultimate twisted lie in Stella's life, and he vowed that by the time the sun rose, the man who had taken her would learn exactly what happened when you tried to steal from a monster. The final hunt had begun, and Christian was willing to raise the entire city to bring her home. The nightmare of Stella's disappearance reached its chilling conclusion in a grimy, ramshackle cabin hidden deep in the Virginia woods. Bound to a chair and clouded by drugs, Stella faced a Julian she no longer recognized, a man whose unassuming journalist persona had dissolved into the mad glint of a psychopath. He spoke of a delusional destiny, claiming they were soulmates from their days at Thea and that his kidnapping was an act of fixing her from Christian's influence. Despite her terror, the perfect Alonso was gone, replaced by a survivor. Stella managed to fray her ropes on a hidden nail, and when Julian leaned in to claim her, she fought with a primal ferocity, headbutting him and tearing at the flesh of his neck with her teeth. The struggle was violent and desperate, ending only when Julian pinned her with a gun to her chin, prepared to end both their lives to be together in the next life. In that breath of near-death, the cabin door was kicked in. Christian swarmed the room with a tactical team, his face carved with a pitiless, cold rage that signaled the end of Julian's reign of terror. Following the rescue, the sanctuary of the penthouse became a space for a different kind of healing. Christian personally tended to Stella's bruises, his hands steady and grounding as he navigated the guilt of his own failed security. That night, unable to be alone, Stella asked for the real story behind the secrets that had nearly destroyed them. Christian finally revealed the truth of Magda, the hideous painting that had been his mother's only work. It wasn't a masterpiece. It was a suicide note in oil and canvas, a symbol of a woman who chose to follow her dead husband into the grave rather than stay for her son. He had forged its priceless status to hold onto the pain of his abandonment. This moment of raw, emotional honesty allowed Stella to see the man beneath the assassin's blade exterior. She realized that while she wasn't entirely over his past lies, she understood the weight of the ghosts he carried. While Stella found solace in the 12 handwritten letters Christian had left in his secret drawer, confessions of his history, his quirks, and his unmailed devotion, Christian was concluding his final act of vengeance. In a soundproofed warehouse, he systematically dismantled Julian, his usual restraint replaced by a primal need to destroy the man who had caused Stella pain. He targeted the very hands Julian had used to write his intrusive notes, moving with a clinical detachment that bordered on the monstrous. It was only a single text from Stella, "Come home to me," that acted as a tether, pulling him back from the edge of his own darkness. Granting a mercy he didn't feel, Christian executed the stalker with 3 strategically placed shots, choosing his future with Stella over the endless cycle of his own rage. The weeks that followed were defined by a thorough reclaiming of their bond. They shared the dream date Christian had described in his letters, a rustic gnocchi dinner at a tiny restaurant in Columbia Heights. During the meal, they discussed the total, internal collapse of Sentinel security and the arrest of Mike Kurtz, the final, invisible hand of Christian's justice. Their relationship was no longer a transaction or a fake lease. It was a reality built on shades of gray and mutual choice. This new era of honesty led them to Santa Luisa, California, where Christian took Stella to a desolate warehouse holding his father's stolen treasure trove. Together, they watched as he set the Magda painting on fire. As the flames consumed the artwork and the suicide note hidden within its frame, Christian officially closed the door on his childhood trauma. He wasn't just burning a painting, he was burning the version of himself that believed love was a disease. 1 year later, the world saw the meteoric rise of the brand Stella Alonso. Backstage at her first major international fashion show in Milan, Stella watched her dreams walk down the runway to a roar of applause. She had achieved her success on her own merits, supported by her sisters by choice and a biological family that had finally replaced their cold expectations with genuine pride. Christian remained her most vital anchor, watching her with a warmth that had once been impossible for him to feel. The journey that had begun with a fake boyfriend and a curated lie culminated on a golden beach in Positano. Framed by the sunset and the scent of lemon verbena, Christian dropped to one knee. He presented an emerald and diamond ring, offering the final and most honest contract of his life, marriage. The butterfly and the monster found their ultimate truth in each other, turning a twisted beginning into a permanent grace. 4 years later, the perfect Alonso facade was a distant memory, replaced by the reality of a global fashion empire based in Soho. Stella handled her success with the same grounded kindness that had first fascinated Christian, though the passing of Maura remained a bittersweet shadow on her heart. Their life was no longer a series of high-stakes missions, but a vibrant tapestry of shared holidays and annual trips with their extended family of friends. During a Christmas gathering in Costa Rica, the group dynamic remained as beautifully messy as ever. Christian watched with dry amusement as the once icy Alex Volkov was dismantled by fatherhood, and Reese Larson teased him about his own inevitable transformation. The final piece of Christian Harper's life fell into place in the quiet of a tropical kitchen. Stella, appearing unusually nervous, revealed she was pregnant. The announcement hit the former cynic with a force that far outweighed any professional triumph or digital conquest. The man who had once viewed the world as a series of cold ciphers and logical challenges finally understood the ultimate solution. Love wasn't a disease or a weakness, it was the missing piece of the puzzle he had been trying to solve his entire life. As he held the woman who had captured his heart and rewritten his future, Christian realized he was finally whole. The twisted lies of their past had been burned away, leaving only a beautiful, honest truth. The hunter had been caught by the light, and for the first time, he didn't want to be anywhere else.